we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not. Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation, based loosely on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack app, and I hope you will, as it might give you some insight into what this podcast is all about. I'm your host, Doug Gardam, and today it pleases me to no end to welcome Graham Nicol to the podcast. Graham, great to see you. Great to have you here. Graham is a father of four. He's a high school teacher, teaches English and Bible. And he's also an elder at Northview Community Church, which is the church that I attend. If you've been watching this podcast, you'll know that. I first met Graham at one of the programs that Northview put on around questioning Christianity, it was called. He co-hosts this. Right. With one of our previous guests, Andy Steiger from Apologetics Canada. And I went because I was starting to get very immersed in the Bible. And so not only from the sense of the spiritual part of it, but the actual text of it and how much depth is there. So with that, we went to the very first one, and there are some very serious people there that are very seriously questioning Christianity. And so I found it just a fascinating kind of chat. But afterwards, I met Graham, shook his hand, and I've been reading the Bible. At the beginning, I was into Genesis. Maybe I was a little further through that. And I had recently come out of reading Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. Okay. And it was talking about pyramids being around the world. Okay, right. And my first question, unfortunately for Graham, was here I am, we're in Egypt, we're talking a lot about pharaohs and Moses bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, but the pyramids are not mentioned at all. Right. You probably remember that. I'm hoping you do.
I do, yeah, more or less.
Like, who comes to questioning Christianity and asks that question?
Sure.
So why I find this kind of intriguing today is because Graham was the first person that actually acknowledged an answer other than shrugging his shoulders. He said to me, I don't know, but I know the pyramids are mentioned in Josephus's work.
Oh, yeah.
And you actually went back to where your study is, and you found the notation and sent it to me. Okay, right. Which let me rate down a whole nother new path. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, Josephus was a historical writer at the same time?
Yeah, more or less. Probably just a little bit after, like, the New Testament era.
Okay. So we're talking 100 AD?
I don't even think that far past.
Okay, still earlier than that.
I think he's writing pre-destruction of the temple, which we generally say is 70 AD.
AD, yes, right? So okay.
If Jesus is crucified in, we usually say 33.
Right.
That's the typical usage. So there's call it 35 odd years before the Romans eventually decide enough of this, and they tear the temple down in 70. So it looks like Josephus is writing in that interim period.
So when I'm going through this, I'm finding, this is fascinating. And as I read a little bit more, I'm getting further down it. But as I started to look at Graham coming on as a guest today, I realized that was actually the beginning of, I'll say, the Substack work that I did. Okay. I had already kind of started to do this on my website, right, but it became several articles actually on Substack, which ended with not really finding a reason. It's just not part of the narrative of the Bible.
Right.
Which I didn't think was a great answer.
Yeah. But sure. Yeah. I should clarify. It's possible there's the destruction of the temple in 70, but then the Jews do mount an insurgency, and that's what ends at Masada. Have you heard of, the famous, So there's an incredible, to this day, I went up it's like it's down by the Dead Sea. It's like the last fortress that the Jews build, and it's way on a mountaintop, like an actual kind of it's like a very large hoodoo. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
Okay.
so it's this raised platform that's totally inaccessible from all sides, and they build their last bastion. It's called Masada. There's a movie from the 60s. It's a very famous Jewish touchstone. So it's possible Josephus is writing after the destruction of the temple, but before. So it could be, I could be wrong on the dates. It could be the early, we could look it up. He could be in the early first century, like
Okay.
late, early second century, late first century.
Okay. Well, I need to say, it opened up a whole nother kind
Yeah.
of like crack into this chasm that like oh my goodness, this is tremendous.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that I kind of found that was interesting, and I haven't said this in introducing you, but you're somewhat of I don't like to use the word, I'll say expert, but you know the Bible and history very well.
I try to learn as much as I can. Learn all the time.
And the best part of it is, if you don't know, you don't fake it. Like you,
right? Yeah, I'm going to say maybe I'm wrong about Josephus. Somebody's going to look it up and say that dummy. He's wrong.
So you're a teacher.
Yeah.
You teach English and you teach Bible, obviously.
Yeah.
What got you so interested in this? Like, was this something that caught you as a kid, or did you come through some other way or do you remember?
No, it's a fair question. So I grew up in Kamloops.
Okay.
Which is, for people who are from BC, it's about a 3-hour drive into the interior. Yeah. It's a good sized town. My dad was a teacher, my mom was a nurse. A bunch of people kind of from the valley, and they were from the valley, born and raised. So they went up country, and a bunch of other teacher friends did. And lots of them started small churches, Mennonite Brethren churches in small towns. Kamloops is one of them.
Okay.
So I grew up, I think I might even have been the very first baby kind of born in this little church called Valley View Bible Church. It's still there, Kamloops today. So what that meant was, like where we live, the valleys, there's lots of Christians.
Okay.
Lots of Dutch Christians, lots of Mennonite Christians, just lots of Christian, like Trinity Western, Columbia Bible College. It's sort of a hub.
Interesting.
It's often described as like the Bible Belt.
Yes.
Canada. Kamloops is not that. Upcountry, it's totally different culture. People are more transient, lots of logging, lots of, like the pulp mill is the major employer. So there's a stable group of people, but there's lots of movement through. I did not hang with a lot of my friends' grandparents because everybody seemed to be from somewhere else in Kamloops.
Okay.
So that just meant that I went to public school, and there's substantial Christian schools here that have a long history.
Oh yes.
There was, I think, a Christian school in my town, but it was weird and small, and nobody even thought about going to it. Okay. Like, I didn't even once consider going to it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Or my parents didn't. My dad was a public school teacher. So I grew up in a small church. We were very faithful part of that church. So, and my family were Christian. So I had lots of Bible stories, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't say I grew up with a lot of substantial Christian culture.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like outside my family, I didn't have like an intellectual youth leader, or our church only ever had one pastor. Like our church is huge, and so
yes, it's different here.
Yeah, if you talk to one pastor and he said, "Well, I don't really know," but he might put you on to another one, or a different one, or yet another one.
Right.
But in my church, we had a guy who was a good guy, but I was not surrounded by any kind of Christian intellectual culture. Really.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it sounds similar to my upbringing, actually, because I grew up in the Anglican church in Ontario, but it was like a Sunday thing you went to church for. Like it just wasn't. My father was part of it and did work within the church, but it was not like what I've been exposed to in moving here.
Right. Yeah.
Now, my frame of mind has shifted quite a bit as well. Sure. But
yeah, and the only reason I say that is because I was a big reader as a kid. It's funny if people know the Bible story. My brother, my younger brother, is a real outdoorsy kid, and I always used to think of myself. There's a story of Jacob and Esau.
Yeah,
Esau is like the outdoorsy guy who's all hairy and manly.
Yeah.
And I had seasonal allergies. I did not like being outside in summer. I was very happy to be inside reading
Interesting.
Dune, reading science fiction books.
Okay.
Like just as I was like a big reader as a kid.
Dune.
Yeah, I loved it. Well, the movie, the 1984, the David Lynch Dune,
Oh,
came out
yes.
in 1984, so I was like 13, and I went to my local bookstore and I was like, oh, look at these cool books. So I just dived into it and knew nothing about it.
It's crazy that you bring that up, and we're going to have a few of these diversions.
Yeah.
But I actually just wrote a tribute to David Lynch.
Oh, okay, cool.
Because my first book, the Globe and Mail called it a David Lynch-like thriller. So for an author to have that said about them is stunning. But what's really interesting is that is still the Dune movie that I think is pretty cool.
Oh, yeah, it has its charms. I know people, I mean, whatever, everybody loves the
Chalamet. It's spectacular.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
But, and everyone says, oh, the original Dune movie is terrible. But it has its charms.
Oh, it links to the book to me
Yes.
that I find fascinating. But the other thing that I learned in writing this article is Lynch disowned his relationship with that movie.
Yeah, I have heard that too.
Which kind of like, wow, because he lost apparently control. He couldn't do the creative things that he wanted to do.
Right.
And I found, okay, this is kind of very, very fascinating. So it's funny, Dune is like, because I got Dune on my shelf still. Like it's still like and I find it very, because there's a quote in it that talks about fear.
Right. The mind killer.
Yes. And to me, that is like, it goes beyond just what the book is about, right? It's like it almost kind of comes into biblical terms in many ways.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Probably. I mean, literally, Dune Messiah is next, right? So
you've read the series?
Yeah,
I have not.
I bogged down. It gets pretty weird in like the fourth book. I mean, I think they diminish in quality. That's pretty universally acknowledged. And then there's like his son adds more, and nobody thinks those are good.
That's right.
Like Dune is great, standalone classic.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Like one for the ages. Then Dune Messiah and Children of Dune.
Okay, yeah.
And then God Emperor is the fourth one. I've tried it twice, and I was like, I felt like actually not even sure if this was good, like not quality wise, but like morally. Like it's very strange as he becomes the worm, becomes this emperor god. Like it's really weird.
Oh wow!
Actually,
that doesn't sound like a high recommendation. Actually,
but Dune itself is cool. Even the next one, but certainly Herbert has messianic notions.
Oh yes, yeah,
obviously. I mean, I don't know if he's personally religious. He was big into mushrooms. Did you know this?
Did not know that, but I'm not surprised by.
He's from like Spokane. That's his thing.
Okay.
So he's like 40s, 50s, 60s Spokane is where he's living.
Yep.
And he's really into those like
the psychedelic world.
Psychedelics as a consciousness. So you can think about the melange spice, like
right on.
Consciousness, and
it connects a lot.
Oh yeah, that's mushrooms more like. I think that and Lawrence of Arabia. I honestly think. I mean, it's documented that he watches Lawrence of Arabia, and it blows his mind. Think about it. This outsider savior who rallies the people of the desert. And you've got Peter O'Toole's like piercing blue eyes that are so characteristic. David Lean's like Lawrence of Arabia. I mean it. I'm sure that's in his head.
I'm even thinking of shots that look like the Dune landscape, right?
Absolutely.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I think like if you read Dune and keep Lawrence of Arabia in mind, especially the film version, because it comes out like 2 years before the book.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then really, once you've read Dune, you can't really watch Star Wars
anymore
because the whole religion in space feels like such a ripoff. Kind of the Jedi,
my god,
derived derivative, I think, from Bene Gesserit.
Well, the other part that I learned about the Star Wars saga is Lucas spent a lot of time with Joseph Campbell.
Yes, you personally mean, or reading him?
No, personally. Okay, he invited him out to the Skywalker Ranch. Okay, he was part of even, they say, the way the plot went. So when you get to the kind of the end, this might be spoiler for you non-Star Wars people, but when we find out that Darth is Luke's father, right? And played by Hayden Christensen in a different role.
Oh yeah, I see.
He almost becomes, in a way, godly, right? Like in the sense of what they're framing up. so that became clear to me when I hear it was Bill Moyer, I think, was interviewing Joseph Campbell on PBS.
Interesting.
It's like a 10-part series.
Okay,
And,
right. The hero's journey, that kind of.
yes, yeah, all the things that, and in fact, it made me read his the man behind the man.
Yeah, right.
I'm getting the title wrong.
Something.
It's a dense book, but
Yeah.
because it really started my whole road down, I'll call it this Christianity kind of world, because I'd started to frame this whole sense that with the mythology part of it, so whether we're going like back to Mesopotamia, the Egyptian, we got Horus, Osiris, all the different number of names we have, that God was actually trying to figure out how to civilize this being that he made in his image. This is kind of my first concept going down that road.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, it might surprise you, and I know we're bouncing all over the place, Graham, but that's part of what we do.
Sure.
And I started reading Tom Holland's book, Dominion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he kind of phrases it as he goes right back to like basically the beginning.
Sure.
And he talks about how Israel was really the first that came up with the single deity that wasn't human,
right,
but was a god.
Right. Yeah.
And when he said that, and when I looked at that, I'm kind of going, okay, that's fair enough until I go to Paul, and it's not just Israel, but the Gentiles and the Jews, everyone, right? Galatians 2:16, or in that Galatians is where I learned it. Bible study, which we'll talk a little bit more about too. And it started to frame it as, no, this isn't, God's got it all figured out. It's a perfect sign.
Right.
It's us trying to figure him out.
Sure. Yeah.
And that shifted again my whole, and that's fairly recent actually that started.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, so you get this in, for example, like the maybe it's late 19th century, or certainly well into the 20th century. There's a strong sense of like development it's almost like evolutionary, but applied to culture.
Okay. Yeah.
So the sense, and you can see this very clearly in a lot of documents in the 20th century, that monotheism is a kind of developmental stage. So that it's the idea that if you take the same evolutionary model that gradually, smaller organisms develop into more complex organisms, there is a sense culturally that, and this now, it probably strikes people kind of as almost racist or culturalist, in that cultures with many gods, or polytheism, are lower, if you will, or like earlier in the developmental phase.
Okay.
So this is my idea. I just mean this is a very common sentiment.
But this actually fits to what we're just
for sure. Yeah.
Interesting.
Culturally speaking, then you move through that to, like, you start with animism, is seen as kind of like the lowest form of religion. Then you move into polytheism as your culture develops, and you start personalizing these. So instead of like, river forces, like, oh no, it's actually it's Poseidon. He's the one who's over all of this. Oh, it's actually this. And then eventually that gives way to monotheism. Is sort of the I don't know exactly what you'd call it. Like, it's, like I said, it's evolutionary a bit.
Like, it has this development, like you said, in culture, that you move as you figure out more, so to speak.
So, I mean, many people today are critical of that because it looks very kind of patronizing, right? Because naturally, it puts the West at like the top, like we're the height of development. And therefore, people who still believe in animism or ancestor worship, and then others who believe in polytheism, Hindu, multiple gods, et cetera, that, they're on their way. It can feel, like I said, patronizing. So I would say today people don't subscribe very publicly to that idea that monotheism is like developmental, but in many ways it's still baked into
it fits into it though, right?
Like, and lots of people think it just keeps going. Then honestly, many progressive Christians, progressive folks would say, yes, then there's another stage where you move out of earnest belief in a single God, and you realize that too is a crutch that you eventually put away, and you ascend through religion into sort of pure ethics. So you see a lot of this in the 19th century. Frankly, a lot of Protestant liberal theologians in the late 19th century they think the Bible's basically a series of myths, that you'd have to be kind of childish to still believe that.
Oh,
the point is not to believe that Jesus was actually resurrected, or that Moses ever actually went through the Red Sea, or that the ark was ever actually sailing around, or frankly that Jesus was actually resurrected. But you recognize, you're meant to recognize, that's all myth, all mythological. But we're supposed to take out the principle that Jesus taught us to be kind to each other, to be loving, to
right.
be. But then you're still so.
Wow.
You hear this in progressive spaces. Oh, in a way, you still believe in religion. When those of us who are enlightened know that it's only a means to an end. It's a means to a kind of more pure ethic.
Right.
Yeah.
So who would be writers of this that you could
Yeah. So it's
because I've got me super intrigued here now.
totally. Yeah. It's hard to even point to one, although I'm sure if I looked at, we could find some key ones, like early philosophers, even like Hegel.
Okay, Hegel. Okay.
Right. Like in the early 19th century, I'm going to say like
Nietzsche didn't go into this
no,
world.
but Nietzsche's an interesting character in the later 19th century, because he's already sniffing this, and he's like, you guys talk about God, but you don't even believe in him. Like, so his expression, God is taught, right? Like,
Yes.
God is dead.
Yes.
It's actually only the first part of his sentence. God is dead, and we have killed him. That's the phrase from.
Okay.
Is it Gay Science? I can't remember. It's one of his books. You look it up. It's called the Madman.
Okay.
It's an incredible little scene.
Interesting.
So he is looking at his, again, kind of Lutheran context,
Yes.
which is living in Germany. His immediate context is 300-year-old Protestantism, Lutheran Protestantism, which has begun in its higher forms, in its its universities in the 19th century.
Interesting. Okay.
Has begun to cease to believe in God for real, and he's really just a crutch, right? Like because eventually you put a crutch away, right? A crutch is for a time.
Yes.
And then you get better, and then you put crutches.
You don't need it anymore.
You don't need crutches. The point is to get past it. And Nietzsche's like despises this kind of post-Christian system.
Right.
So he advocates something like a return to paganism, honestly, or like the will to power, like the real man.
I have not, I've read a little bit of Nietzsche, but I've kind of steered away from it because I don't feel it's necessarily correct.
Oh, for sure. I mean, my goodness, I also don't think he was dead.
Right.
And Nietzsche's intense in a way. Like, I wouldn't just sort of casually encourage people to go diving into Nietzsche. And a lot of people in the 20th century looked at Nietzsche as a particularly dangerous writer. That if you read him, you could lose your moral bearings,
right,
and start to live purely as an exercise of power. Like, the Nazis misread Nietzsche, but it's not like they don't use him.
Right, for sure.
They definitely. So there is. It's not quite a fair link to link Nietzsche's will to power with Third Reich power, but they're not
separate.
They're not totally separate.
No.
Even though it's not quite fair, I don't think, to blame Nietzsche for that.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Just like Wagner. Like, Wagner is also playing around with these ideas. He's a deep inspiration for Nazism, but you also have to take him on his own terms.
Interesting.
And he's living about the same time.
So I've not read a lot about Hegel. I've kind of browsed that, but not a lot. So I'm kind of intrigued now to kind of step back that. So this is interesting that we've gone to that. And now we're coming, I almost feel like it's a new epoch that's coming. We've got these intellectuals in our world.
Yep.
I've not always been, the intellectual world has steered us down some really not dark path, like very dark path.
Sure. Yeah.
And I go the 30s, right? And going through that. And now we've got this time where I hear weekly almost that people are leaving the faith. I hear that often.
Certainly.
Then Justin Brierley, you're probably familiar with him. So, and he's come up with this book because he's the one that's doing these chats with Tom Holland and Bright and and constantly atheist against Christian. Like that's constantly his thing.
Right. Although Holland is like,
yes,
back in the faith.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he's got a book talking about the rebirth of belief. And it's like, and I kind of step into this because that's kind of what I feel happened to me.
Yeah.
Like I've written about, if you believe in science, whether you like it or not, you believe in God. I'm sure that's going to be controversial to hear that, but every kind of rabbit hole I go down in science, subatomic particles, cosmology, like it doesn't matter. The unconscious, it's just like it comes back again to like, well, the one I think this was another thing I asked you is like we had nothing to do with us coming into this existence individually, right? We forget that like almost all the time. But do you think that with these, like you've got a Jordan Peterson today, now a lot of people check him just because he doesn't kind of he's not coming out saying that he's I'll say holding the Christian flag. Right. It's a weird.
He's respectful of Christianity.
Absolutely.
He's even appreciative of it, but he's stopped short of actually embracing it, as far as I know.
And he's directed so many people to the Bible. Right. To me, that's phenomenal. What do you like with the Brierley book? Do you think there's something that's shifting right now, or no? Is that like
for sure? You feel it everywhere.
You do.
Oh yeah, especially amongst young people. I mean, like,
interesting.
And I don't mean millennials. I mean younger than millennials. So, I mean, people who know me. I'm at risk of overseeing things in demographic movements, so I want to be careful. But
yes,
I do think that we largely see deconstruction as a kind of, that is, people who were raised in the church, maybe somewhat nominally too, right? They went to Christian school maybe, or they went to some mega church somewhere, and now they're 34 or whatever.
Right.
And they've seen the world and they've realized, oh my goodness, I grew up with all these closed-minded, small-minded perspectives. Now I've seen the world, I've met all kinds of people, and I realize my silly Republican parents who still live in Kansas, right, are completely wrong, and I live in, whatever, a larger city, a coastal city, right, that kind of thing. And so I've put childish things behind, including religion. Now I've moved on to this model. So some of those people are also coming to the end of that pursuit. They've explored a life of, call it open hedonism, and have found that it actually,
personal truth.
Yeah, and it actually has some limits. Some people have been like, yeah, so my parents are monogamous, married, and how limited. So I've just played the field and run around and hooked up with whoever. And some of those people are like, that's not so good, actually. Like, I really don't like this.
Where is that fulfillment that we're promised?
And then suddenly look somewhat longingly back to the traditional modes. So you see it in millennial spaces, you see it in like the trad, or like, have you ever heard this, like, trad culture, traditional trad wife, trad?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, you can see this is like often kind of middle-aged millennials, early 30s, middle 30s, many of whom have come through a life of
freedom.
Do whatever you want. Right.
Okay.
That's
it feels good, do it.
Personal fulfillment is really the great goal. And they're like, I don't know, this is not so good. Like, I
can't do this.
I want a husband and not a bunch of boyfriends. I want a family.
Interesting.
I want a child. I want like something stable and normal. For sure. There's
there's a certain appeal to me to this idea that, and that this, we could actually go right down to the media world, is that the media that we're listening to has promoted.
Yeah.
And we've kind of bought into.
Sure.
Except when we go to check our own lives. And this is part of what I've said for a long time, is what the media is telling us by and large. And then you look at your own life. They're not the same.
Right. Yeah, like, are you living an Apple commercial where you're sort of getting up every morning and doing your
Yeah.
yoga and bleep bloop and like checking in and picking up your coffee and like people are doing this, but they're also like, I don't know, is this it? Like just having a bunch of gear and cool headphones?
And what about I'm not happy all the time?
Great. I must be doing something wrong.
And you're telling me I'm supposed to be happy all the time.
Everybody in those commercials is happy.
So this is to me the part that kind of gets kind of confusing a little bit is that, and it's like it's almost, it seems like everything. It's not just a few things, it's anything that you see promoted. And I think our social media has just extrapolated that to another end. So I'm really intrigued by what you're saying about this shift, because it's like people are finding this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, literally ask anyone, does anyone think Instagram is real? Like, of course not. Everybody knows this. So even though that's sort of the life,
Yes.
and it's hard to separate yourself, you know, you're only seeing the absolute best of people's lives.
Right.
So it's false in the sense that it's not that everything is made up, but
Right.
it's non-representative because it doesn't show people at their lowest, because it's just weird to post your low moments on Instagram. It's not what it's for. That's what TikTok's for. For real.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I honestly think people were like fled early in the pandemic as TikTok boomed. It's people fleeing the crushingly defined culture of Instagram, which is so relentlessly positive.
Interesting.
And so people are like, this new platform, you can cry in your car.
Yeah.
You can overshare. You can like pour your heart out to people and be weird and ugly even. And people will eat it up because you really can't do that on Instagram. It's just not what it's for. So that's its own. So that's its own phenomenon there. The other thing I think too
Interesting.
is like millennials generally were raised more or less on the promise of the internet, by which I mean, like when you speak of like a shift in consciousness, the internet is really radically transformative, at least as profound as the book, the printed book, the good.
Yeah. Oh, no questions. Yes. That's a good, I like that. That's a good.
Yeah. I think
comparison,
because you can argue that we lived in the book age kind of well into the 20th century.
Oh yeah.
But the internet was the one that really changed it, in the sense that it gave people the feeling that this was contemporary culture. So you could, I think, you know, in 2010, you're right, your median millennial. I always use this model, Taylor Swift, 1989. Taylor Swift is my median millennial. She's at the absolute peak of that birth cohort.
Oh, okay.
And that's why she's popular. She's literally speaks to those people. Those are exactly her people. So 2010, Obama's been elected for 2 years. The internet is beginning to grow. You're born in 1989, so you're 21 years old, right?
Yep.
The world is before you, and your parents have these stuffy old ideas, but you are online. You're on Facebook.
Yeah.
Twitter's just arriving. Instagram's around the corner. Like the whole world is opening up. There's tons of money that's pouring into the internet.
At unprecedented levels.
There's so much venture capital. And honestly, so it's expanding like mad. People are laying fiber optic cable. And when those parents say, if you abandon religion, if you abandon our ways, how will you know what's up and down? How will you know what's right and wrong? How will you maintain? And the answer that comes back is like, we just know. We'll just know. And I mean that the internet is implicitly grounding that. We will all go online and figure out the truth. The internet will say who is good and who is bad, who is true and who is false, who to follow, who to dump. Like the internet will kind of, that hive mind, and you see that in Google, like the concept that the growth of Wikipedia, we're going to catalog all the world's information. That is such an optimism in that era, that the internet is going to like truly carry us, I think, to a higher consciousness where we all share. And man, has that ever not worked out? Like a lot of those people thought. Like, what could be better than going on Tinder? Like who needs to, like, you live in your small town, you only know 40 people. Like you're got to marry one of them?
Yeah.
That's not going to work. the internet, you could marry anyone. Well, it turns out that actually
You can't.
it's very, very challenging. And that the internet could actually be like a force for darkness, not for perpetual light. But in 2010,
You didn't know
I
that.
don't think people think that. I think they think we're young. I don't know, when I was in my 20s, I thought the world was going to be awesome too. Like, you're in an optimistic time of your life, and then you've got this truly what is an objectively major change in the entire mode, and old people don't get it, right? So you see,
Because you're out. It's generational.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
gone.
right.
Yeah,
You know, like
generation. It's gone. Yeah.
you're not my generation. It's so if you're online and people are like, "Oh, you're on Twitter? Wow, like that's really you're really in the mix of the modern."
Yes.
We literally had a store here called Future Shop that sold like refrigerators and computers because that was the future, right? Technology
Yep.
was the future. And now, man, oh man, those millennial people, those who have children, they are much stricter about internet access for their own children than they ever had. Because they experienced the darkness midway.
I'm kind of blown away by what you're saying right now because I'm thinking of our daughter. They daughter and son-in-law. They've just had a little boy.
Yeah.
No screen time.
Right? See?
Like we got in trouble.
I bet.
When we turned the TV on.
Yes.
Babysitting. Because we were trying to catch the Oscars last week.
Totally.
And I mean, not serious, but they said, we don't let them have the screen. Yeah. So you're mark on. Like that's personal boots on the ground experience. So I'm talking about. So
like the school I teach at, the middle school, went to like everybody gets a computer 12 years ago, 14 years ago, right? At that same time, right? Because that felt like the future.
Yeah.
That felt like if you want to be a responsible citizen, you get computers into those kids' hands because the future is going to be computerized. Man, oh man, you talk to millennial parents now and they're like, how about no? How about I do not want my kid to have a computer. We severely limit screen time because they grew up in it. It's a whole thing.
That's, I don't know. I did not expect to get that in this conversation today. That is awesome. Man.
It's a really interesting phenomenon. So I do think that's also what's driving the kind of conservatism
that's going on in the world.
In some ways, is that people who were like saturated in it, truly raised in kind of like internet 1.0.
Yeah.
Right? They, unlike their parents who didn't really, they only ever dabbled. The parents mostly were like, I don't know, I'm still, right? How do I make a PDF? Like,
how can you not learn cursive writing?
Right, exactly. So, parents, adults defer to those young people. Oh, you're online. I mean, I remember people saying, "Oh, it's so cool. Look at little Jane.
Yes,
she can work that cell phone. Isn't that intelligent?" Right? That was it was seen as a mark of intelligence.
Absolutely.
But that kid, if you give your grandkid a smartphone, like,
no,
people don't want that to happen. That's a massive sea change.
No, well, like it's a small boots on the ground example, but I'm living that. Like it's like
I can see it.
Can't have that phone. Like it's like because I can remember like the new iPad came out, right? Oh, when they could run their games and everything with it.
What could go wrong?
Well, it's very interesting. There's so many things that are like connecting, and you see it from a whole different perspective. So that's very interesting.
So that's where you see young people who, like, by which I mean kind of Gen Z, kids who are maybe 24, 25.
Yeah.
Many of them do not share that they're like the millennial sense of progressivism, because if millennials have worked their way through this, they're still in process. But many of those younger people are not. They also grew up online, but by then the internet had kind of curdled, if you will, right? So they're they're exposed to way more, call it lightweight content, like, if you will. Like
absolutely.
If the mainstream media is still sort of like center left, for sure. Most of these kids have grown up never watching a TV show of any sort, like not on television, not the news at all. They couldn't tell you the name of a single anchor, right? Like ask a 20-year-old kid, name a single television anchor. Of course they can't.
What's an anchor?
What are you even talking about? I don't even know what these words mean. So because they've grown up in the kind of curdled internet, because, relatively early on, Twitter, and mostly Twitter, became like a little bit of a hiding space for more conservative ideas, like way more conservative than the mainstream media. And meme culture
Yes.
is very conservative, very, call it right wing.
Okay. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So when you hear like the alt right, that's what we're talking about, right?
Okay.
And the alt right is different than the old right.
Yes, it
Right.
is.
It's like country clubs and Ronald Reagan and, you know, like California, when California was Republican. What? Impossible to imagine. The alt right is like meme culture, is like Gamergate, etc.
Okay. It's hard to keep that all together because because last summer we had the Reagan movie come out.
Okay, yeah.
And so for this baby boomer, I'm at literally the tail end. Like I remember that.
Right.
And it was presented in a very different way almost to the extent of where would somebody be like that today?
Right.
And he was like seen in the world that I lived in as like almost evil.
Right. For sure. Yeah. Or Margaret Thatcher.
Oh yeah,
Right.
it was all that.
If you were an artist in 1982, you thought Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were basically the devil.
They were after you,
yes.
And it's how time changes that to like where we are today, and it's like it's kind of a stunning kind of reversal of things, right? But it comes back for me. It still comes back in many ways to this whole media. But again, I'm in a very different demographic than what you're talking about, right? And so it's like, where does that information come from?
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Things keep changing. It feels like, especially as I get older, and I'm sure you feel it this way too, time compresses.
Yes.
So you feel like I find myself saying things like, well, it's sort of new sounding, like, like rap or hip hop. Well, hip hop has been like the dominant musical form for like 40 years.
A long time, actually.
Many full-grown adults have grown up entirely in that world. But to me, because I came of age just a little bit before rap was dominant, it still seems new to me. So, as you get older, things like, it's hard to remember that young people are, people are like, oh, I'll reference The Lord of the Rings. That'll be relevant to these young people. The Lord of the Rings is from 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002. Those are old movies.
Well, I mean, it references a book that was written 50 years before
That's true too. Yeah.
Like it's kind of a crazy thing. This is why it's so interesting, because we started with Dune. 66, 64, or something like that.
Mid-60s.
And that's a brand new movie.
Yes, right. Picked up again.
And like, I mean, there were quite a few, it was certainly talked about. I mean, personalities like Chalamet, you said, and different actors bring those forward.
Right.
But the story they're still saying Dune.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of like, because even in reading it, and that's a long time ago now. I was going to say, I probably reread it 10 years ago. And there's some classic things that stay with that.
Right.
But like the fear quote that comes out of it, right?
Yeah.
To me is one of those that's human nature. Like that will be there forever.
Yeah. Anyone who's read Dune comes away with the truth of that insight that fear is the mind killer. It's a quote for the ages.
And as you grow older, you get more experience. You actually have experiences that prove that to you. It's no longer just a 15-year-old statement.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a 45-year-old person saying, I've lived through that 3 times in my life, right? And not in particularly trying circumstances necessarily. It could just be at work in a program, right? And like, you've lived through this.
Yeah.
Fear is the mind killer.
Yeah. You get fearful, you get panicky, you make decisions you look back on and think, why on earth would I have done that? But you weren't thinking because you let fear take over. And so you make insane looking decisions.
So for me, I fall 40 years out of that zone, yet I'm now kind of going back to this ancient text.
Yes. Right.
And realizing that even though with our phones we think we're the smartest generation of ever,
Right. Yeah.
We still have all the same emotions, the same
Yes.
kind of desires, the same things that are there.
Yeah.
And yet, and the way we actually try to explain them are less clear than they were if we actually spend time reading. Like I always kind of go back to the Bible studies. So I wanted to get into that because I find that intriguing, and I know you're very connected with it. But Galatians men's study I went to,
Okay, cool.
2:16, I found profound and shifted my head. Justified, because I repeat this because I just find it amazing. But you're justified through faith, not through works of the law.
Right.
And Paul wrote this numerous times, but
correct.
That's the one that I kind of grabbed at.
Yep.
And it's like, that is kind of profound when I feel I'm coming from a whole world that by following the 10 Commandments, I can earn my way into heaven. This is very simplified.
No,
okay,
sure.
But
that's a common sense.
I don't think it's that far off what we have in our head. And Paul comes and has just literally threw that almost upside down.
Right.
How did I not ever hear that before?
Right. Yes, I mean, of course, you could say, and maybe you did in some way, but it wasn't drilled home to you.
Not to that level.
Right. This is what makes Christianity different in some sense. That it isn't ultimately about the scales of good versus bad at the end of your life, which is more or less, I mean, I was in a mosque with a school group, and, this imam said that's basically it, right? Like, at the end of your life, God will weigh, use more or less exactly this terminology, your good deeds against your bad. And if your good deeds outweigh your bad, well, you go to paradise. And if your bad deeds outweigh your good, you'll go to hell. So it's very common for people to think, oh, Christianity is just like the different version of that, like slightly different God, slightly different, and then Jesus something something has something to do with it. But that is not true. That is not Christian theology. Christian theology is you might live your life in a holy way. You might seek to be transformed in your actions, but not because you are hustling to earn God's favor and trying to stack those balances up so you get to the end and hopefully it's just a little more. It's in the black, not in the red. But you do it out of a sense of having been transformed, right? Having been saved, you live out what your salvation looks like. And so, I mean, I literally just had this conversation with my class today. Because the human relationship is similar too. When you are loved, right, then you act in love, right?
Right.
So for example, in a marriage, do you earn your wife's love by how many flowers, how many poems, how many dishwashers, you know what I mean? Like how many kind deeds, how many, well, no one really thinks that this is how a great relationship works. Even a friendship. You don't, okay, well, I sent you 4 texts, you only sent me 3, so I'm a better friend than you. But if you call yourself a good friend or a good husband or whatever it is, and then you are utterly neglectful of that person,
that doesn't work.
Then the question is not like you fail the test of being a husband. The question is, I thought you said you loved this person. Why doesn't it look like it? Help me explain how the love you profess with your mouth is not expressed in like the behavior of your heart.
Absolutely.
The behavior of your life. So, but the truth of it is, if you marry someone, I don't know, your husband could be locked in prison and then can't love you. Right? Can't ever do the dishes. Can't ever send you flowers. But people don't think they're not married because, he hasn't been able to do the things. Now, obviously, that's no one's ideal for a marriage, but the love is what precedes the actions. The actions flow out of the love in a proper relationship, not the other way around.
And it's almost like our society being so transactional as it is, because we actually almost don't do anything unless we get something for that. Translates into
naturally
that do these actions will equal love.
Right. Right. And you look at the old models, the worship of Zeus or whatever, and
Yeah.
the gods truly are flattered by worship, right? Like you
Yes.
guys sacrificed this bull and you gave the choice parts to, and if you read the Old Testament models of sacrifice, they can sound so similar.
Yes.
The character of God is not venial like Zeus and Poseidon and Hera, and because they are jealous and foolish and
Yes.
they're easily tricked and they have lusts and right,
They're human.
they are basically immortal humans
Yes.
with powers. God is never impressed with our sacrifices. What on earth could we do to impress him or flatter him? Right? It's a preposterous
Yes.
notion.
Right.
We just like the obedience a child gives to their parents is not technically impressive. When a child makes a drawing, no parent is like actually impressed with this scrawl. You don't put it on the fridge because it's good. You put it on the fridge because it's done out of love.
Absolutely.
Right. And
Absolutely.
that's much more like the relationship we have with God. Like he loves us not for our capacity to make great paintings, as it were, even of our lives. He loves us before we even put pen to paper. Like
he created us.
Yes, that love is already there. Right. And then we act in ways that in a sense manifest it, right?
Interesting. So do you think that's coming through to the younger, to your previous part of this conversation? Because it's like, how is it? It's like I've been through this whole, and I'll call it the corporate world, right? You learn to, it's Samuel Johnson, I think, said it, right? You tell the character of a man by how he treats someone that can do absolutely nothing for him, right?
Okay.
I can relate to this, right? Because it's like, that's what you're taught, right?
Yeah.
If you can't do this for Graham, then he's not going to do this for you.
Right. What have you done for me lately?
And it's, exactly. And it's trying, and now you come in and you go, but that's not actually how it works.
Right. So no question.
Profound.
And yeah, it's hard for all children, I think, because we all grow up in households where parents say, I love you, ideally, right? So let's say an ideal household, there's unconditional love.
Right.
But there's chores, there's obedience.
Yes.
There's do your homework. There's don't put your feet on the carpet, whatever it is, like whatever the rules you grew up in your house. So as a child, you can get a sense of like, oh, my mom or my dad loves me if I put my dishes away. Right. I mean, you can get caught up in that. Either way, every child has to come through like the strictness of obedience, whatever that looks like, to be formed as a child, and then to enter into a slightly different relationship with your parents where you realize, oh, like those were all acts of love. Like my parents aren't impressed by my obedience. That was part of their way of teaching me, instructing me. And so everyone, as they go from childhood to teenagehood, and there's lots of tension in those teen years as every person makes that transition. How do I feel about my parents who are restricting me? They're telling me I can't go out. They're telling me I can't date this boy. They're telling me I can't do this. I don't want my freedom. I want my freedom. So you only love me because I obey you is a classic 13-year-old, 14-year-old mode.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
This is transactional, right? And then you, ideally, if the family is solid or the love is truly there, then you actually realize, oh, you know what? It's not. Like, because even when I did screw up, my parents did come and bail me out. My parents did come and help me. They've communicated. It was never, they didn't love me because of my obedience, but my obedience is proper given how much they love me. And if you come through that, you can come then into like a very healthy relationship as an adult with your parents.
It's great how you're able to articulate that, because immediately thinking of the prodigal son story.
Of course.
And a story that I misinterpreted for most of my life because I'm the eldest.
Ah, yes. You're like, that kid sucks. He deserves it.
And I would go away from that story thinking like, but what about me?
Yeah. Right.
Not real. And again, this is like
it's literally in the story. But everybody doesn't read the second part. Like everybody stops after the kid comes home and the father hugs him.
I wrote about this too, because it's like I thought, and I kind of feel dumb about this, but the prodigal word,
yes,
I thought of it kind of meaning prodigious. like
Okay.
prodigy.
Oh,
Like,
okay. Interesting. Yeah.
and that's
It's a
not what it
strange word.
means.
It's true. It's not. Yeah.
It's and it's not. I've been misphrasing it sometimes because it doesn't mean wicked, but it
No.
means what's the other word that I'm thinking of that anyway, it's
Well, it means like this. It's this. It is
reckless.
It is misnamed.
Yes.
Because the son's prodigality is that he spends on wine, women, and song.
Right.
He takes
Yes.
this. He doesn't save it. He's not careful. He's a spendthrift. Like he throws caution to the wind, acts like a fool. Yeah. So that's, if you call it the prodigal son, then that sets up that. By the way, that's not in the Bible. The prodigal son.
No.
That title is like a little
We made.
Yes, it's a little
After.
italicized.
Yes.
Oh, here's the part about
right.
So of course that just sets your mind to pay attention in a particular way. It's not really what the story's about.
No, this is part, like, this is why I said, like, when I read that, misunderstanding what prodigal meant,
Yes.
I thought it was about the eldest son.
Interesting.
And I could never figure, it never made sense.
Right.
And yet it wasn't until, and I think it was actually Tim Keller in hearing a
course.
podcast, he said that we don't realize that the old son and the young son are both done wrong things.
Yeah.
Because the older son has done them for the wrong reasons.
Right.
Just he's done it for exactly what you've been explaining.
Totally.
Right? I'm not doing this. I'm doing this because I'll get your love by doing this.
I've earned it. Do like a young goat, right? Why would you give a young goat for him when you never gave one to me?
And he says,
look at all the things I've done. He literally says
exactly that. And yet he never repents. He never.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And the young son does.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my goodness, man. Like, and this is why it bothers me sometimes, Graham, is like, if I've misunderstood those for so many years, other things, and if I've done that, I'm probably not the only one. Maybe the only one prodigal, but maybe like, and these stories, like, they're very relevant currently. Like that's I think today when Paul says, and I laugh at this a little bit sometimes, but whether you're Jew or Gentile, whether you're man or woman, whether you're circumcised or uncircumcised.
Right.
And it's like that at the time when he did that, that must have been like almost setting the revolt bells ringing.
For sure.
Because it would have been so, to me, staggeringly different than the whole idea of the 603 rules or kind of laws that they had created from the Ten Commandments, right?
Yeah, and you can see it. You can see literally in almost every one of Paul's letters, especially Romans, obviously Galatians, but many places elsewhere, the sense that, again, you even see it in Acts, because where does Paul usually go when he comes into a city? He goes to the synagogue.
Yeah.
He starts with usually like diaspora Jews who no longer live in Israel. They live in somewhere in Greece or in Rome or wherever they live, and they've made synagogue for themselves. Obviously, travel is complex. People are not going back to the temple very often. Maybe once in their lives, they're going to make a pilgrimage of sorts to go to Passover, but basically they live in Greece or wherever they live, Asia Minor, right? So and many of them would have never even been to Jerusalem, right? They would have been born and raised. There are multiple generations of faithful Jews in foreign cities, in Greek-speaking cities, typical. And so they've set up a little hall, a synagogue. And so that's when Paul goes into a city, just read the book of Acts. He usually goes to synagogue first. And he usually aims to make a connection with Jewish people who have a history, because Paul knows his Old Testament. So he's like, let's start here. You guys know about Abraham, and they're like, yes, totally. And Paul has Jewish credentials. He talks about this. Oh, right. He's like, I'm circumcised. My name is here. Here are my people. I can draw my genealogy. Like he fits for them.
Well, isn't he kind of revered as like almost that knew the law better than?
Yeah, I mean, if you believe him, I mean, he says so about himself, which is funny. But yes,
Standard and Galileo.
True. I mean, he has credentials. He's like it's a little bit like when someone says, look, I went to the Ivy League. I can tell you what's going on there. Someone who's just criticizing from the outside, well, that's one thing. Someone who's like to the manner born, and then they have criticisms or whatever, then you take them more seriously.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Paul's like, I could, if it was a matter of hustle, I'd win.
Yeah.
I'd win in spades. Look at this. Look at my family. Look at my genealogy. Look at my training.
I've got it all.
I've got it. I've got it. I've got it. I would be the winner. And yet I am the chief of sinners. Like, because this is not the system that we're operating on. It is not a hustle contest for who's going to impress God the most. That's not how this works. And that's as he develops it. Because then people say, well, then what's the law for? Like, and so then he goes, and that's what makes Romans in particular such a complex and interesting book, because then he has to kind of unpack, well, then what was the law for? If it wasn't to set out like a kind of gold star contest.
Right.
Which he wants to, oppose. And that's where he gets this complex argument. And he says the law was meant to highlight our inability to achieve this in and of ourselves, so that we would look to God and cry out for mercy, because we couldn't possibly, it made us so conscious of our sinfulness.
Yeah. Like he says that, right? Because he says, like, the law gave us sin.
In a sense, because it defined it.
Like we now know that what sin is. Before that, we didn't.
Yeah, and he gets to a sense where he's like, he's like, if you're a Jew, you have like the promises, you have all these. It's great, these great advantages, but unlike your sort of normal pagan, you don't even know you're doing wrong, like, because you don't have the law, so you don't you have a kind of the benefit of ignorance. Right.
Well, you have probably something inside you. Right.
So then he goes on and says, those people do in their own way have the law, like, written not in tablets of stone, but in tablets of flesh.
Right.
They have it sort of written on their hearts, their consciences, as he puts it. So he's like, they know kind of. Right. He's like, even the most rank pagan knows that stabbing your brother in the back, betraying your wife, lying instead of being honest, is bad. Right. Everyone can feel it. There's no culture in the world where it's perfectly fine to murder everyone. Obviously, right?
Yeah,
you couldn't even have a society if you.
No.
So everyone feels some sense of order. Every society is in some sense religious traditionally, right? They have some rules.
Absolutely.
Who can you sleep with? How do you deal with violence? What's holy and unholy? Like, there's never a culture that doesn't have some order to it.
Well, isn't this why the difficulty we have with personal truth comes in? Because I believe I see this in a series, a Netflix series called The Sinner. I don't know if you've seen it. Bill Pullman is the star of it, and he solves mysteries. He's a detective. But the third season, they have these two the professors, and a long story, but they talk about personal truth. And he says something to the effect of, you believe that you're not supposed to kill people. That's your truth.
Right.
But I believe I can kill people.
Right.
And you're going to say I'm wrong.
Right.
But why am I wrong?
Right.
That's my personal truth.
Right.
And until that, Graham, that was like such a clear definition and so clearly spoken that I clued into, that's why it doesn't work.
Right. No one actually believes it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've literally never met someone who actually thinks you can do whatever you want and it doesn't matter.
No.
Generally, those people go in asylums or something like it. If you truly act like no one can tell you what to do and you can do whatever you want, you're not really allowed to be on the streets. Like, that's actually dangerous.
Yes, there's
a
problem.
You could just drive into, like, a child because you felt like it. That's not allowed. Like, you can't do that.
No.
So we're not going to let you be that kind of person. So when we talk about personal truth, I understand people are trying to get away from or out of a sort of
being told
claustrophobic sense that, like, there's only one way to live. There's only one way to do things. Maybe their family was so strict. Maybe their culture, or their town, or whatever. I get it. And so they make this hyperbolic kind of statement. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's your truth is definition. Well, literally, no one acts like this. Like that's ridiculous. So you almost can't take it, like, seriously that your truth is whatever you make it, because nobody could function this way. So, okay, where are people coming from? Why do they espouse this feeling?
Right.
They're trying to throw off the shackles of whatever morality was raised with.
Yes.
Something.
Well, I find it kind of like, because we can be like very quick to decide, right? Like we will go to, I'm trying to think of a good example here of where we can just, this is set. I'll go back. It was Malcolm Gladwell's book.
Okay.
I think it was Outliers, but it probably was Blink. And they were cleaning up New York City. And they went to this one street where people had just thrown rocks at buildings and broken windows.
Right, classic.
And they're all broken.
Right.
So it's just acceptable to pick up your rock and throw. So when they stopped allowing that, behavior stopped.
Right. It changes the vibe, for lack of a better word.
Like, if you allow graffiti to be put on the walls, then graffiti will be put on the walls. But if you stop that and maintain that, people won't do that.
Yeah, or at least not as much, because it doesn't. It gives an air of chaos.
Right.
Right. And it's amazing. I don't know, if you watch movies from the 70s and 80s, New York movies, you look at those trains, it's incredible.
Oh, yeah.
They're covered in graffiti inside and out.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. Like, I mean, however chaotic the trains and the subways are today, and they have their own challenges, of course, but like, there's something about 70s, early 80s New York that is chaotic in a way that
Absolutely.
I don't think we can really even grasp.
Well, in a way, I think it becomes what's acceptable and what's not.
For sure.
And when you're not going to combat against what you don't see as acceptable,
right,
it'll continue to erode what that is. I'm still not coming up with a good example of what I was thinking of, but it was kind of like how quick we can be. I'll give you. Here's the best example I can. This is recent, so I'm going to go back to. We just recently watched 72 Canada Cup Series. That's probably before your time.
Right. As in Paul Henderson.
72, correct. Everyone knows that. Yeah. And what was so interesting in watching that first game was because we thought in Canada they wouldn't score a goal. Like, when we went into that, we were going to wipe. This is our game. We're going to wipe them literally off the rink.
Yeah.
And we were halfway through that game and we were tied against Russia.
Right.
And the commentating immediately went off Canada.
Oh, interesting.
Almost to the back, like they were bumps.
Yeah, right. Okay.
They weren't in condition. They couldn't do what these run.
How did we ever trust these guys?
How quick it happened was unbelievable, because we weren't even through a first game.
Right.
And I thought, like, how fickle we can be with those balances.
Yeah.
So to me, this almost comes back to how one starts to go, and like, you've kind of given us the history of the internet in a way here as far as balancing that, but what's kind of happening and why you're saying this is millennials that are now younger than millennials.
Yeah, like what we would call Gen Z.
Gen Zs, that's right. And it's like, what's kind of transpiring, and I'm witnessing it with my grand.
Yeah.
It's like,
right, and those kids are even younger, but they're the children of millennials.
Yes.
Yeah, like I said, the current very young kids, high school and a little bit into college right now, they are, I don't know, they're not reliably liberal. They are kind of, they're a bit Trumpy. I don't know what else to say it. Like, so, and it's funny, kind of, because you can hear, like, from a Christian perspective, we've all heard stories about how, like, we tried to raise our children in the church and now they've gone away. You can kind of find these stories of, like, mainstream liberals who have tried to raise their children to become mainstream liberals, and then they fell into the clutches of 4chan or whatever. Yeah. And now they're like, kind of conservative. And, you've got all these hand-wringing parents.
What did I do wrong?
What did I do wrong? We tried so hard. We sent them to the best schools. We sent them to empathy camp or whatever, right, to try to teach them this. And how could they possibly turn their back on all that we've done for them, all that we've raised them? They've become conservatives or something like that, because they got radicalized online.
And we don't see this.
Well, it depends which generation you're in, right? And it depends what your context is, whether you observe this. But there's no question that in my circles, there is not a presumptive liberalism politically amongst very young people.
So interesting. Yeah. Like,
whereas people used to think all young people will be liberal. That's the.
Well, I think there was a sense that they were being taught to be that from even their schooling, right?
Yeah, sure.
And it's like, no, like, that's not quite how it works that way.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a stunning thing to happen.
It is an interesting reversal for sure.
And I find it very interesting, even from my own experience. So it's like, it'd be interesting on your side, because you were saying, we got off, but you were saying about how you grew up in Kamloops and not really connected. Because I'm very interested in that part of your story.
Yeah, I
is
get back
that,
to that.
and how, like, because you sound very much like what I experienced. We went to church on Sunday.
Right.
My father was involved with the church, like as a server and things like that.
Yep.
But I got fed up with hypocrisy as a teen. That was, I couldn't stand, like, that would just drove me nuts.
Right.
How did that work in your world?
Yeah. So my church was very small. My parents were very involved in it, and I would not say that we were nominal Christians. Like, we were committed Christians. We were there all the time.
Right. Yes. Yep.
Like, it was a big part of our lives, even though it was a small church. But I didn't have a lot of training beyond my household and going to church.
Right.
So what I mean is, I didn't go to Christian school. I didn't have like the kind even of the youth group that my kids have gone to, where they've heard theology and things that
Unbelievable.
I didn't really have.
Yeah.
So what it meant was that when I went to college, I didn't know very much. And I had this.
Where did you go to college?
So I went to my local. So I played basketball.
Oh, like in town.
So I went to what was then Caribou College.
Oh, okay.
PRU. Mostly to play basketball, because a bunch of my friends had graduated the year before. So I went to join them and hang out. And, I didn't really have any clear plans, and I mostly just wanted to play ball. But
so you did play basketball?
I did. Oh, yeah. I played in high school, and I played kind of.
Because so often when someone's very tall, like yourself, it's like almost cliche.
True.
And I'm kind of going, no, I'm not asking him that question.
Fair, yeah.
But you did play basketball.
So it's a kind of a classic moment. It's my second semester. I'm in this largish lecture hall in Kamloops, and I have this great philosophy prof. I had like the most boring, like, analytic, like, logic prof the first semester, and I just about didn't take the second. But I was like, okay, I'll come back. And this guy was like your quintessential continental philosopher. I should look him up. His name is Carl Feck. He was German. He had an accent, and he was this incredibly dynamic, like, sold out, like, passionate learner about ideas. We read
spoke to you directly.
Yeah. And he said, I remember I'm sitting back, and he said, and I'll tell you all, I studied to be a priest, and I read the Bible backwards and forwards, and I tell you, it is garbage. All of it is trash from beginning to end. So he says this in class. And I was like, oh.
Wow.
Right? And I thought, that's not true. But then I thought, well, that's all I've got. Like, I suddenly imagined myself in a conversation with him, and I thought, if we were to sit down and he were to say that to me kind of in person, and he didn't, this is not like God's Not Dead, where I stood up and he called me out and said, let's have he was actually great. He was a tremendous professor. So, but in my head, that was the moment where I realized I actually have essentially nothing more than that to say. If someone were to challenge me and say, I've read the Bible, I was like, had I read the Bible? Like, a bit of it. I certainly hadn't read a lot of it. Like, I'd just gone to church and been a guy and played basketball and whatever. So he says, I think it's garbage. And my response is, well, I think you're wrong. But that would be the end of my ability, because then I'd be out. All I had was my opinion. So that started me on a.
That's your first pushback.
That's my first moment where I was like, I actually don't even know why I believe this.
Oh, wow.
Like, I have I didn't think it was wrong.
Right.
But I realized I've got nothing really much more than a couple of Sunday school memories and, like, my belief that it's right. So that began. We moved. I worked at a summer camp where I did a lot of, it was like a basketball camp, but it was a Christian basketball camp. So I was talking about the gospel a lot. And I also realized kids were asking me questions, and I was cobbling together answers. And I thought, I do not know what I'm talking about here, like, barely. So then I discovered the Bible college in town. We'd moved to town here. And so I was with my grandma, staying with her for the summer, and she introduced me to the president of the Bible College, Columbia Bible College.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, I think it was mid-August that I was going to go to UFE, and so or UCFE at the time. And so I transferred to CBC, and that is what began my, like, kind of intellectual, call it, like, experience of faith.
Oh, so you would have been what,
I was
early
like
20?
20. Yeah.
Yeah, so young. Okay.
Yeah. Something like
And
that.
that captured your.
That just began the process. I met some great professors, and I just fell in love with the idea of knowing more, thinking more. So I never really went through like a deep crisis of like, I don't believe this.
Right.
I had a strong family. They were Christian. I didn't really feel like, defying them.
Right.
I was not rebellious, but I was like, I need to know more, and I need to know as much as I can to kind of like comprehend and be able to explain. Should someone ask me,
Sure. Absolutely.
what do you think about this? What do you think about this? So, in some ways, questioning Christianity has been kind of a lifelong, well, at least since my 20s, if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah.
I've been in that
Mode.
mode, sometimes high key, sometimes low key, sometimes formally, sometimes informally, but often just thinking. And I usually say to my students or others, like, if you're anything like me, you will be your own sharpest tempter.
Right. Right.
It's possible you'll go to a party and someone will say, you believe in that Christianity crap? Like, maybe that'll happen, but it's not very common.
Right.
Usually you meet some nice people who aren't Christian and who don't believe in anything or whatever. They believe in something else.
Right.
And they're not mean to you at all. They're actually quite nice. And then you leave and you go home and you think, huh, what? Does it matter that they're not, you know what I mean? Like click, 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 click. At least that's for me. It's the drive home that I start interrogating
Interesting.
myself. Like, how do you deal with that? Do you really think those people are unsaved? What needs to happen there? Like, what did you think of their viewpoint, etc.? So I am my own most active kind of like interlocutor.
You're doing that.
Yeah. It's not like people usually ask me, what do you think about this? So standing up in front of questioning Christianity is kind of interesting because I'm like, oh, this is like what's usually happening in my head, but now it's happening in real life.
Because there was something that happened during that for me that, like, even when we talked afterwards, like, you're trying to get home and I'm blowing up.
Sure,
Like,
sure.
and it's like, and I kind of feel like that all the time now. Like, that's part of
Right, yeah.
the challenge, shall we say? Because I'm constantly wanting to go deeper, and I'm interested when. Like, I brought the pyramids, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You could have easily just said, "Oh, come on," like it's
Right. Sure.
and you didn't.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, I still have not heard. My background's engineering and science, so it's like before I decided to do the writing, and it's like there's still no real answer to how they were built.
Right.
Like, to me, like, it just, like, I hear the thousands of slaves and whatever. Like,
Right.
no, but come on, like,
Yeah.
have you ever tried to organize 10 people to move a piano?
Yeah, right.
Like,
Yeah.
and when you start kind of putting that together, what brought you to I'll call it the science part that kind of like brings forward some of the stuff that is in the Bible that tells you that, like, I'll give you the best example I can, and this came about after it. When evolution in Origin of Species came out.
Oh, yeah.
And I read this in numerous different places, but Stephen C. Meyer brought this forward in Darwin's Stat. I don't know whether you know Stephen C. Meyer or not, but
not totally. But okay, I think I can probably follow.
But he was talking about there was a hole. There's many holes, but in particular, the Cambrian explosion.
Right.
And this plethora of new species came out of nowhere. They've never found fossils.
Instantly kind of.
Yes. And Darwin knew about it.
Right.
But he said, we just haven't found the fossils yet. Well, we've gone to enormous lengths to demonstrate, even down to genome and that level, to demonstrate we still don't have any. But my question is at the same time, they set up this thing called methodological naturalism.
Okay.
Science did. It's a doctrine that said, if it's not of natural origin, we're not only going to say, like, we're not look at it and say no, we're not even going to allow it to be investigated.
Sure. Okay.
So anything that physical, nothing spiritual, anything like that, it's out.
Yeah.
So we've already kind of set it up.
Alchemy,
anything.
Yeah.
And when I learned that, I'm going, well, this is kind of why, because I was trying to, another thing I'd written is, where did science and I'll say God, Christianity separate?
Right.
Because they actually do the opposite to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So my question was to you is like, where does that come into your speak with regards to the biblical world, or does it at all?
Right. I mean, so to take up that question, I think in the West in particular, right, by which I mean Europe or whatever, there is a time of intellectual ferment. You can call it like the Renaissance era. This Renaissance literally means rebirth. So there is a sense, this is post Crusades. Medieval Europe, Catholic Europe has kind of gone outside of itself for the first time. Right. So a lot of what happens in the Renaissance is facilitated a little bit by what's discovered and reconnected between the Middle East and Europe. Like it's what is it, 1054 that the Eastern and Western churches split. Like the Orthodox, the Great Schism. So we call that about 1000, right? The East and West churches split. So we're talking about Western Catholicism.
I'm 700 years, 300 years from that in my reading right now.
Okay.
So I'm at 742.
Right. So the West becomes Latin, East, and the East is Greek. And they kind of forget, some things were forgotten, what should not have been forgotten. But like the Latin West literally forgets how to speak Greek. Like the Adriatic Sea becomes such a dividing point, basically between the Greek East, the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Slavic East, and the Catholic Latin West, that they start to lose touch with some of those historic documents. And it's not until the Crusades, whereby at least some Western Latin Catholics start to spend substantial amounts of time in not just the East, but like the Middle East, like the Levant, the Holy Land. They start to connect with Islamic scholars, some of whom have preserved like parts of Aristotle that the West had lost, like hadn't translated into Latin, and so they had stopped reading them. So there's this otherwise kind of like who speaks well of the Crusades, basically. But in the midst of all of that, there is actually some intellectual churn, it seems, as Greeks and Latins start to share more information. There's literally people transferring back and forth. Trade routes are opened up. So you get
like it's all new.
Yeah. And they're starting to find new ideas. And that seems to, like, the rediscovery. So this renaissance is the Latin West kind of like discovering its roots in a sense.
Greek,
at least its Greek roots in some ways.
Really?
So, you've got these increasing developments, like, how much Shakespeare, for example, and even in kind of the British or the English Renaissance, like, I don't know, he is obviously reading Greek plays. I don't know if, like, Chaucer's 200 years earlier.
Right.
I don't know if Chaucer had access to the Greek tragedies, the Greek tragedies, Euripides, etc. Like, I don't even know if he knew those people. So at some point they just didn't, right? They just weren't present. So by the time you get to the Renaissance, Shakespeare's been reading, maybe by now translated, even well into the 19th century or early 19th century, like, who was it? Keats. John Keats has a poem about reading Homer for the first time in this Chapman translation, because Keats did not grow up with a good education, so he could only speak English. Couldn't read Latin, couldn't read Greek.
Right.
So he has to get a hold of, and he has a poem called "On Reading Chapman's Homer." Like, it's about that, like, mind-blowing experience. This is in 18 something, like 19th century, early 19th century, and he just then has his mind exploded by Greek. So either way, there's this moment where, and we tell the story of Galileo, that the church clamps down on this kind of traditional modes of knowledge,
right?
And so in the Enlightenment, so-called, right, they look back on the Dark Ages. So you've got the Enlightenment, which fancies itself the response to the Dark Ages. So you increasingly get the sense that to be advanced in your thinking is to be anti-Christian.
Right.
Like, so that's key to the French Enlightenment in some ways, right? Even the French Revolution is radically atheistic in its repudiation of both the French politics, but also French religion, French Catholicism. They established the Republic that has no official church. I mean, obviously the Catholic Church is still prominent in France, but it's not a state religion after the Revolution. So that is where we get, and Darwin's part of that puzzle, where increasingly to be dogmatic in religion is to be seen as like limited in terms of your scientific pursuits.
Right.
So, famously, you get ideas like you shouldn't investigate cadavers because this dishonors the body. This idea that like, you're creeping out at night, you're like Frankenstein, you're finding recently buried bodies so you can do your experiments or something like that. And so that's where I think you get that split, that to be religious is to be kind of medieval in your thinking, and non-scientific, not rational, not forward-looking.
There's not an intellect that's associated with that, right? And hence the intellectual part separating or moving away from that.
But it's very reactive because actually, of course, it's the church that's setting up universities and hospitals and etc. So the Dark Ages were probably not as dark as people think they were.
And it was a long time.
It's
like 400 years.
Yeah. So, there's an interesting book by a guy named Seb Falk called The Light Ages. It's kind of an interesting view of actually how much science is going on. So maybe by now we're starting to see a fusion again, but evolution really splits the Protestant church for sure in the early 20th century, right? You've got liberal Protestants who basically accept evolution, Anglicans, Lutherans, etc., like mainlines, and then the fundamentalists who reject it in the early 20th century.
That's kind of go back to one of the things I was saying before. It's kind of like how we're like, there's problems with evolution, but there's problems on all fronts, right?
Sure, right. And the world looks very old.
And there's some pretty interesting things that we can learn that come from evolution that we demonstrated. But to say that that's now what I'm going to believe, and it did everything, just doesn't seem to work very well to me.
Yeah, so I mean, we're maybe healing some of those breaches. That's mostly on the Protestant side. It seems the Catholics never quite had the same. The Catholics I know don't have the same hang-ups in the sense about science. Not quite. Like I can't remember who it is, but it's a priest who pitches the first Big Bang theory. So, and even Augustine is very casual seeming about like how old the Earth is, and he holds it pretty loosely. So the Catholic tradition is not, I don't mean it gets out scot-free on this, but this is this battle over evolution, inherit the wind, what's his name? Not Darby. Yeah, like that big, the Scopes monkey trial, William.
Oh, right. Yes.
That whole, America, like, that's a crucial time for America, where it also becomes like, if you believe in evolution, you're a backwoods fundamentalist weirdo, right? And so, that's been a long time healing out of that too.
Well, in many ways, it's like we simplify it to a point that, now we can agree with it.
Right.
And so that's what goes forward. And we don't realize there's a lot of intricacies that go along with that, that connect to other things. And that's why I've kind of said, like, when they discovered the Big Bang, that was a real disappointment in some ways to the science, because there was a beginning.
Right. Well, and it actually dovetails with a Christian or whatever, a theistic worldview in which God spoke and boom, it started. So, you can say, I get it. Christians are like, the Big Bang Theory is fake. Well, I understand if you think that it was some random process, but the Big Bang Theory, if you will, as conceived by this, I can't remember his name, Catholic priest, is like, this is the initial act of God that puts the universe in motion.
Yeah. So, in the beginning.
Yeah. So you don't have to think of those as like radically opposed to each other.
Or even absolutes, actually. And I think that's sometimes where it gets kind of mixed up. We're past time.
I wondered, yeah.
I was going to say, I can't thank you enough. I hope we get to do this again, because you just led me down a whole bunch of threads. But it's Graham Nicol. It's been wonderful to have you on the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as I have, because there's been some fascinating things talked about, and especially around I'll say the Gen Z and the shifts that you saw, you were seeing kind of coming. I think it's an amazing thing to go on. Anything you'd like to wrap up with on your own?
Well, just to give you one last little thing, I can't remember if we talked about this. So if you think about the Tower of Babel
Yes.
as a pyramid,
Yes.
right? Like, I don't know if you,
No.
if I've ever said, like the pyramids per se,
Yes.
big ones in
Yep.
Egypt are not, but I think the Tower of Babel is basically a pyramid. Because this sense of like, we'll build something that we can scale, the top of which will be in the heavens, bigger than any kind of thing that we can make.
Right.
There's something called the Bible Project, and there's
Yes. Oh, it's great.
It's Tim Mackey's. I don't know if it's his idea, but one of the characteristics, I think, in his perspective of the Babylonian Empire, is that they are among the first to crack fired brick technology.
Okay.
So if you imagine, for example, like if you remember the fiery furnace story, right? Shadrach, Meshach,
Yes.
Why is there an enormous furnace that can be heated to such, like that it's big enough to throw people?
Comes out of nowhere.
Yeah. Like, why do they even have this? Well, there's something apparently to the idea that the Babylonians were among the first to basically realize that you could fire brick and kind of make
hardness
stones.
Yes. Okay.
And so there's some sense that the Tower of Babel and the etymological link there between Babel and Babylon, that there's something about this technological attempt to reach God on our terms,
right,
is a really interesting. And if you think about sort of Google and it's, we're going to amass the knowledge of the world, even Wikipedia is a very interesting story about the co-founder who's like become Christian. Or is like now fully Christian again, even though he was raised that way. So there's something about, it's an interesting rabbit hole, if you want, about tech and the Babylonian desire to unify all the languages together that we get all the way back in Genesis. And it feels similar sometimes to Silicon Valley, some of the Google projects, of course, AI and the idea of like extending your consciousness, etc. So I'll leave you to.
Well, it's interesting when you say Babylonian because you talk about, think of Nebuchadnezzar and building the gigantic statue,
right,
and what it represented from the various nations that
feet of clay,
and the languages. To me, that almost speaks to it. Anyway, I know we're short of time. I'm not really short of time, but I know you have to go. I thank you again very much, and I do hope we can do this again. It's just such a neat. You have so much to contribute on the side of the different aspects of things that we can believe and go down to understand it better, right? And I think it really, to what I was saying before, if you believe in science, or I don't even think belief is the right word. If you understand science, whether you want to believe it or not, you're kind of connected with God in a very big way that you might not even be aware of.
Right. Yeah. We live in an orderly universe.
It's so perfect. That's the part that's so hard to kind of comprehend for me. Like the trees grow. We do nothing for it.
Right.
The cosmos, gravity, all those things are all there. But with that, I was going to say that leaves us for room for a sequel.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, thanks very much for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed this, like I said, as much as I have. Thanks again, Graham.
For sure.
Bye-bye.
For you.
Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.